Alrighty, I think we're about ready to get started. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Alex Anvari. I'm the president of the United Nations Association, and I am very happy to have you join us tonight on this very exciting webinar presented by the United Nations Association of Southwest Connecticut, featuring Chris Johnson. So first of all, I'd like to just present a little story background on why we're here, why space is such an important topic. So our objective tonight is to build knowledge and expertise. This will be recorded. This webinar will be available on the National UNA USA internal forum, as well as on the chapter YouTube channel. And I'll provide that link to you towards the end of the presentation tonight that you can share as you wish with other potential people that are interested in this topic. This chapter, United Nations Association of Southwest Connecticut, we really are all about creating and enabling impactful volunteers. The goals of our action-oriented orientation is events and programs covering the full range, from human rights to Mother Earth to world press freedom, foreign policy, humane and orderly migration, international hospitality, cultural exchange, and much more. We also lobby Congress, so we're very active in terms of getting policy recommendations passed and endorsed by the United States Congress. We also build career credentials for participation. We have many high school students and college students that volunteer with internships and other activities to build their credentials. While interacting, we actually do visit the UN General Assembly and more. So please do pay attention, and if you're interested in any of these benefits of volunteering, being an impactful volunteer. Now, the Westport, we also operate as a Westport Town Committee, where we host hundreds of UN diplomat staff and families every year. This will be the 57th year on June 26th. We'll be playing some, all health regulations allowing, playing some soccer, golf, tennis, paddling. We'll be taking our guests, international guests, to the beach and much more. If you're interested, please do email UNASWCT@gmail.com. Also exciting up and coming is our Mother Earth Day Student Creativity Contest and Awards. Last year we had entrants from 5 states, from about 15 schools, and on our website you can see those entrants, really beautiful art. And for this year, our deadline is April 16th. So net, advocating for the ideals and vital work of the UN, we pay very close attention to human rights and fundamental freedoms without distinction to race, sex, language, or religion. We also are advocating for peace and security based on respect, and of course, the country's duty to protect people and the diversity of their rights, and also achieving self-determination. And then we also advocate for cooperative solutions to problems of an economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian character that cross borders. UNA membership is free for youth. And like I said, we do mentor career skills. We help you earn credentials. And you can see that link, which I'll share again later, is how you would join and of course select the Southwest Connecticut chapter. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker today, Chris Johnson, who is a space law advisor. How cool of a title is that? With the Secure World Foundation. He's also a professor of law at Georgetown. And Chris and I are very delighted you're here. And Chris, if you'd like to take over here, I'm gonna I think you should have host. You should be able to share your slides.
All right, great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My name's Chris Johnson. As said, I'm the Space Law Advisor at the Secure World Foundation, which is an NGO focused on the peaceful uses of outer space, prevention of an armed conflict in space, and also the use of space for human and environmental security here on Earth. So as an NGO, we of course work with the United Nations. We work with state departments and space agencies, and increasingly really with the commercial sector. So, the role of an NGO is nuanced and difficult, but it essentially is representing not the views of states, not the views of corporations, but the views of all the other stakeholders in civil society, the uninvolved public, the affected public, the scientific community, the general international peace and security interests, along with other societal interests that may not be able to be forcefully put forth through those other mechanisms, states and corporations. So this is the role of NGO focused on space sustainability and space security. And as also introduced, I teach international space law at Georgetown, just as an adjunct. So, the role of an NGO is nuanced and difficult, but it essentially is representing not the views of states, not the views of corporations, but the views of all the other stakeholders in civil society, the uninvolved public, the affected public, the scientific community, the general international peace and security interests, along with other societal interests that may not be able to be forcefully put forth through those other mechanisms, states and corporations. So this is the role of NGO focused on space sustainability and space security. And as also introduced, I teach international space law at Georgetown, just as an adjunct. So what I'm going to present to you, and I'll give you the headline for it. I'm going to hopefully do about 20 minutes on Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, the forum and the home of international space law. And then about 10 more minutes on what else happens at the United Nations concerning space and other really pressing issues, and kind of emerging topics in space governance. So first, a little bit about the history and structure of the United Nations. As you know, UN created the 1945 UN Charter, comprised of the 6 principal organs. Of course, you see before you, and the slides have links direct to General Assembly, Security Council, the ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, which has suspended its active work in 1994 because there was no places left on Earth without a government in place. The ICJ, the principal judicial organ of the UN, and of course the Secretariat. Where I'm going to be speaking is about a body and a committee which exists underneath the General Assembly. So at this highest level is the General Assembly. Underneath that are a number of committees. Here's a slide from, I think this was a meeting, the meeting of General Assembly where they were voting on non-permanent members of the Security Council that I took a few years ago. But we're speaking about the General Assembly. And from that General Assembly, underneath that General Assembly, there's committees that are relevant in how the UN looks at and considers outer space. So first, I will mention that 4th committee dealing with special political and decolonization. And it has a number of issues that are in its mandate, any issues related to decolonization, and along with Palestinian refugees and human rights, peacekeeping, mind action, outer space, public information, atomic radiation, University for Peace. So amongst all those other areas that are related to decolonization and areas outside of state control, outer space is in one of them, the 4th committee. And I'll mention it now. Underneath that 1st committee, the Disarmament and International Security Committee, that 1st committee also deals with space, but only in the context of disarmament and international security, where the real, a lot of the talking and discussion and deliberation happens pursuant to that 4th committee. So to start off at the top again, General Assembly has a number of committees. The 1st committee is going to deal with the security issues. The 4th committee is going to deal with special political and decolonization issues. Underneath that 4th committee is where we have the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Oh, I have a few photos just of, when you go and see 1st committee, it's active, it's bustling. There's delegations walking around, talking to other delegations. It's a professional environment, but also very busy and I would say almost noisy environment with a lot of work being done. And remember that as I will refer to different environments at the UN later. So here's the slide and just a photo of, going back to our early considerations. Here, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty was being discussed at the first committee back in 1966. So back then, COPUOS would be reporting on these issues up to the first committee. Back then, the mandates of the different committees were a little bit different. But here, what is developed at a lower level flows up to a higher level at the UN. And for those who want, there's a newsreel about some of this historical information about the Outer Space Treaty. Here is General Assembly First Committee again with US Ambassador Goldberg, who constitutional law scholars know as a Supreme Court Justice, students of the United Nations and US diplomacy know as a diplomat. He was also instrumental in the drafting and negotiation of the Outer Space Treaty, which is what we're going to get to a little bit later. When we talk about COPUOS, we mention the Outer Space Treaty. When we talk about the Outer Space Treaty, we always have to bring up the COPUOS. Outer Space Treaty developed at COPUOS. Here's an earlier photo of the second session of COPUOS when it was only a handful of member states. Here they are, let's see, this is a meeting in New York. This is even before the Outer Space Treaty. It was just a Outer Space Affairs Committee to discuss problems in dealing with outer space with only a handful of nations. In that only handful of nations, they were able to come up with some basic rules on space governance. You could see quite smaller, even the fourth session of COPUOS from 1963, the Secretariat, which would sit in the middle, then the member states and their delegations sitting around in this horseshoe pattern, and then observers a little bit further back, and then the translators. So quite a smaller committee. It has since grown quite a bit. So COPUOS, which answers to the fourth committee, which then answers up to the General Assembly, has for quite a while, had these instruments and developments and deliverables. When we go back to 1958, and I won't go through all of them, but I will mention all of them. That first General Assembly resolution says that the UN should consider questions relating to outer space. There should be a committee on peaceful usage. The very next year, the 1472 says it needs to be a permanent committee. It should meet regularly. And almost immediately, they begin working on instruments discussing governance of space activities. These early instruments are, of course, non-binding General Assembly resolutions. The International Cooperation Resolution essentially has basic elements. 1721 also deals with the registration of space objects with the UN. If you launch something to space, you should register it with the UN pursuant to 1721. However, as I said, non-binding resolution. 1962, they do that Principles Declaration, and honestly, everything which is in the later binding international instruments in space law is mostly contained in that Legal Principles Declaration of Res 1962 of 1963. In there are all of the principles of space law that we find in the later treaties. In 1966, President Johnson calls Ambassador Goldberg and instructs him to take that 63 Principles Declaration of 1963 and turn it into a binding instrument, turning into a binding treaty. Because the US is under, is conducting the Apollo space race, and there needs to be protection of astronauts, there needs to be some binding elements about return and assistance given to astronauts, there needs to be binding elements on responsibility of states, liability of states, registration of space objects, and a few other elements that are in there. Turn it into a treaty. They begin starting work at COPUOS in 66. They finalize it in December of 66. It is done at the COPUOS and done at one of the actual subcommittees of COPUOS, then meeting in New York and in Geneva. It is accepted by COPUOS as a full a committee as an annex to a resolution. It goes up to the first committee, as I mentioned, then which dealt with areas outside of state jurisdiction. It goes up through that first committee. It's accepted. It goes up to the General Assembly. It is adopted as a resolution with the treaty as an annex to that resolution, and then open for signature. So the Outer Space Treaty is a UN treaty. It is developed inside the machinery and inside UN fora, but it is open to member states. It signed by many countries on the very first day that it was open for signature in January 27th, 1967. It then enters into force in September of 67. As of 2020, I believe we have, I think, around 110, maybe 111 states, which are states parties to the treaty. They have not only signed it, but they have ratified it, and they are bound by its terms, and they also enjoy its protections and its freedoms. So this Outer Space Treaty is the most important international instrument related to space. It is the quote unquote Magna Carta of space law. And then these later treaties expand on the Outer Space Treaty. The rescue agreement on the rescue and return of astronauts expands on Article 5 of the Outer Space Treaty. The Liability Convention expands on Articles 6 and 7. The Registration Convention expands on Article 8 of the treaty. They're done in quick succession. They are short treaties. The Outer Space Treaty is, I believe, it's 17 articles long. You could read it in 10, 15 minutes. You can read all of the treaties very quickly. By 1979, perhaps a bit of treaty fatigue is setting in. The Moon Agreement is longer, it's lengthier. It was negotiated by the US, but after it was really finalized, the US realized that they didn't like everything that was included in there. It is not seen as a successful treaty. It is not widely ratified. About 18 states are party to the Moon Agreement, whereas Outer Space Treaty and the other 4 main core treaties have at least 50, 60 states which are party to them. The era of treaty making kind of ends at COPUOS by the end of the 70s, and from the into the 80s, they realized what could have been treaties maybe should just be General Assembly resolutions dealing with direct broadcasting from space, dealing with remote sensing, the placement of nuclear power sources on spacecraft, and then these later instruments. The most important recent development is these long-term sustainability guidelines, which are also not a treaty, but were developed within COPUOS. So this is kind of the track record of what has been successfully negotiated at COPUOS. So what is COPUOS? As I said, in 1959, it was 24 states which are parties to it. By 2020, 2021, 95 member states. It is one of the largest committees in the United Nations system, which has its benefits, but also its detractions in terms of a large, I wouldn't say unwieldy, but a large and perhaps slow and deliberative body, which has both traditional spacefaring states, emerging spacefaring states, states which do a few things in space, states which do only many things in space, and other states which are maybe not space capable, but certainly space utilizing and which rely on space activities. It also has observers, including sovereign states. The Holy See is also very interested and a keen observer of what happens in space. They care about what happens in outer space, especially observatories. There are also intergovernmental organizations ranging in size and importance and power, all the way from the EU, which has its own citizens and currency and a whole infrastructure, all the way down to almost think tanks. This International Institute, UNADWA, situated in Rome. So but they're all intergovernmental organizations which are observers. It also has non-governmental organizations which are observers, including those which are focused on space activities, which are interested in space law, international law. My organization is listed in there, Secure World. You get to be an observer to COPUOS while you're not a state through ECOSOC, which I mentioned at the top of the presentation. If you are admitted to the ECOSOC and granted the rights to observe, accepted as a member of civil society, you can then observe any meetings in the UN system. So here is the schedule for 2021. This year it's going to be all online, but essentially it meets with its two subcommittees meeting first, scientific and technical for 2 weeks, legal meeting for 2 weeks, and then the reports of those subcommittees are then brought up to the main committee, the plenary, which meets in the summer. 64th session is going to meet this summer, and only the 60th and the 58th of the subcommittees. So this is what the room looks like now in Vienna. This is a meeting of the scientific and technical subcommittee. The chairperson and the secretariat over on the right of the dais, the member states, and then the observers in the back. This is what it meant. This is what it looked like when we were meeting over in elsewhere in UN Vienna in the IAEA building. This is a meeting room a lot larger, used for CTBTO meetings, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization meetings, and IAEA meetings. I only include this. You see on the dais members of the Secretariat, which is the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. I mention this because this was taken by a friend of mine. That's me in the back. I was an intern at USA. The Secretariat is speaking. There, the chair is the Romanian astronaut Dumitru Doran Pronario, right in the middle. And then to his right, our left, is Mazlan Othman, who was responsible for establishing the Malaysian Space Agency. So some real interesting players. Astronauts usually attend these sessions of the committee, usually on state delegations, to make a high-profile presentation. This is what it looked like on a very easy Thursday afternoon of the committee. No one was really looking. I stood up and took a photo. What it looks like from the stage, looking into the delegations during a very, I think it's probably a really boring session, maybe on definition of outer space or delimitation of where outer space begins. Just wanted to have that in there. However, we returned back to the main room, the traditional room for COPUOS at the United Nations office in Vienna in 2014. Here, each delegation has one seat that they get, and then the seat behind it. And if the delegations are larger, they usually are spread out to the back of the room. So it is kind of a cozy atmosphere. And these rooms, the delegations are arranged alphabetically by name in English. And I believe in that occasionally rotates to their name. It is written in other languages. Not to get too detailed into what these committees work on, you can see some of the issues that states are going to discuss. Here, kind of perfunctory, stuff, but getting deeper into it. Let's see here, space debris. Agenda item 8, space debris. States are going to present on what they know about space debris, how polluted is low Earth orbit, steps to remediate space debris, and specifically, this is the scientific and technical. It's going to be more focused on the technical aspects and scientific aspects of space debris, whereas the legal subcommittee may discuss what should be done about it, what can be done about it. And the findings of both committees are going to go up to the main committee, where it becomes more political in nature. That's just on space debris. If these meetings run for 2 weeks, the chairperson may open 5 agenda items in one afternoon and take statements under 5 agenda items. And then when that agenda item is kind of exhausted, they may close that agenda item and move on to other agenda items. So states make statements on, agenda item 6, and the very next statement could be on agenda item 8. All right. Further agenda items on space weather. If you don't know what space weather is, that's particles from the sun may cause Coriolis effects and may affect satellites, background radiation, solar winds. It can cause the northern lights. It can cause blackouts to electrical grids. You have to keep an eye on what happens in space weather. Near Earth objects is protecting the Earth from asteroids and comets, asteroids from beyond Mars, comets from the outer ring, the Oort cloud. They both may threaten the Earth with catastrophic impacts. There are scientific aspects to be discussed as we deal with them. So these are just some of the things. Those are newer agenda items. A very old agenda item, look at 17. Geostationary orbit, what rules do we have for geostationary orbit, et cetera. So these are the items at STSC. Additionally, there's some working groups where they can work more informally, where it's not, a chairperson recognizing someone on a delegation. They're going to go meet and actually get down to the nitty gritty of what should be done. Some of the ones to watch, I would say that Space 2030 agenda. That's definitely one to watch. Here's what it looks like as you walk in. Here's a earlier meeting of the legal subcommittee. As I said, very smaller meeting. It's gotten a lot bigger since then. Here's the agenda items at legal subcommittee. Again, looking at what should be laws and norms to govern outer space activities. I see interesting things with number 10, dealing with space debris, what rules there should be with space debris. That's not all the agenda items. I think let's look at number 12, general exchange of views on legal aspects of space traffic management. Meaning, with all the thousands of satellites that we have in low Earth orbit, in medium Earth orbit, up in geosynchronous orbit, 23,000 kilometers, that's a lot to coordinate. Things are moving at the speed of orbital velocity. They sometimes do not have propulsion to maneuver. It's up to ground-based astronomers to track everything. Should there be some rules of the road for how all those satellites and their orbits should be, put in a coordinated dance as they go around the world? I also look at number 13, dealing with small satellites. Small satellites the size of a phone or a refrigerator, may or may not have propulsion, may or may not have long lifespans on orbit, may or may not burn up totally as they re-enter the atmosphere. So small satellites have exploded in the recent have exploded in activity in the recent last couple of years, and they're honestly a cheap, quick way to demonstrate your space capability. Also, number 14, general exchange of views on potential legal models for activities in exploration, exploitation, and utilization of space resources. So, does there need to be a UN framework, a UN mandate to negotiate a treaty governing space resources? Some states say no, other states say yes, many states say we don't know, we need to talk about it. This is a newer agenda item and certainly one to be watching for in the future, including this year, and how member states take that. They also have working groups. Not too much going on with many of them, except that Space 2030 Agenda one is one that I'm closely watching. Although that first one, if you're a legal scholar, status and application of the 5 UN treaties on space, this is, I like watching this working group because that is scholars, not just practitioners and diplomats, but space law and international law scholars. That's one I watch out for. Additionally, the International Institute of Space Law, the IISL, and the European Center for Space Law hold a symposium. This is what they did a couple of years ago on the Moon Agreement, 1979, and which honestly didn't enter into force even until 1984. Whether there needs to be further consideration and work done, maybe a addendum to the Moon Agreement or a meeting of the states parties of the Moon Agreement. And here's the full COPUOS agenda item. Once it gets up to COPUOS, the full plenary, it's more political. And it's also not just space itself, but space as it affects other UN issues like space and water, number 11, space and climate change, number 12, use of space technology in the UN system. The UN does rely on space data if they're, say, tracking humanitarian issues and disasters, matters for treaty verification, work of peacekeepers, etc. So once it gets to the plenary, it's more political, it's more high level, but also really interesting to attend. So you can also look at the working groups at COPUOS. Again, the Space 2030 agenda, I put it everywhere because I don't know really, they're still shaking out, it's still political how it's going to go. And all of this, who runs these meetings, who runs COPUOS, is this United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, which, let me see if I can go back to that first slide. When we go to the Office for Outer Space Affairs, the USA is part of the Secretariat. So when you work at the UN, you're going to be working for somewhere along the Secretariat system. So here the Secretariat and USA is serving a meeting of underneath the General Assembly. So you see the interplay between different organs of the United Nations system. So anyway, that was my presentation, but I'm going to take the rest of my time to talk a little bit about elsewhere in the UN system and other things happening in international relations for space. All right, good. So I've mentioned what happens in COPUOS, which now meets in Vienna. And also it's the peaceful uses of outer space. But what if you're not talking about peaceful uses of outer space? What if you're talking about Space Force? What if you're talking about the fact that military activities have been occurring in space since the dawn of the space age? And in fact, military capabilities foster the creation of space capabilities. Space is militarized. It's not weaponized per se. It may become so. But here at COPUOS, they only talk about peaceful uses. So where are security issues about space discussed? They're not discussed in COPUOS or in that fourth committee, that branch that I showed you. But that first committee, International Peace and Security, and bodies underneath that meet in Geneva. And this is where the Conference on Disarmament meets. This is where the Disarmament Commission meets. This is where United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNADIR, is situated. This is where some codes of conduct are occasionally discussed. The UN keeps these two tracks, and you could argue that it is actually beneficial because the spirit of COPUOS is about peaceful uses, and it is not, I would say, like polluted or affected by what happens in the security side of space. There are some movements for disarmament and arms control in space. The most interesting one of them, currently on the books, the UK has a proposal for that was voted on, and it is a General Assembly resolution last year, that states should return their views. They should, submit their views on what are some practical near-term measures which can be taken to prevent armed conflict in space or an arms race in space. This was not done at COPUOS. This was not done even in Geneva. It was done at headquarters in New York, in General Assembly in First and Fourth Committee, hoping that something can then develop along these lines. I see a question. Give me a chance to read it here. Beyond arms control, what's the approach to economic strategic implications of asteroid mining? Well, there are many aspects of what asteroid mining, the technologies to grapple with asteroids has economic concerns. If you can grab an asteroid that is 95% nickel, you don't want to bring it back down to Earth. You want to maybe perhaps manufacture with it in space or take it to a celestial body, use it for some type of purpose. And there may be business models for that. At the same time, the ability to grab an asteroid could help us if that asteroid is on a collision course with the Earth. And maybe it's being monitored by the Minor Planet Center. Later this year, let me think. Yeah, later this year launches the DART mission, which is a double asteroid redirect test, NASA's DART mission. I think next year launches the Psyche mission, another NASA mission. DART is to prove capabilities for planetary defense, deflecting the asteroid. The Psyche mission is a scientific mission to study a rocky asteroid. Almost, I think it's an entirely metal asteroid. Both of those will aid us as we, ramp up our planetary defense activities. The good news for those who are not deeply watching planetary defense is there are no currently known and tracked asteroids which are threatening the Earth with catastrophe. And we predict that we have found around 95% of the largest, most threatening asteroids. So there's about 5% that we haven't yet to find. And then as we go further down that scale, that percentage is less, maybe 30 or 40% of asteroids up to about 100 meters or 200 meters. So we're still last of asteroid threat detection that has to be done. I should note, and if you want to get more into planetary defense, underneath COPUOS, or with USA as the secretariat, there's the International Asteroid Warning Network, the IOWN, which is an international consortium of observatories which are looking for asteroids. And then the same page, Space Mission Planning Analysis Group, which would be the group that comes into action once a threatening asteroid is found, is detected. This space mission planning, the same page is national space agencies, which would mount a mission to go deflect that asteroid. So here, that is done inside UN machinery. The UN has assisted in that task, even though they're not the space agencies. They're not launching the asteroid redirect missions. They can assist in coordination of those missions. And there are arms control issues with planetary defense, which it's really just the coordination and maybe potential liabilities from asteroid redirect. So that's one of the ways that, you know, we see what space agencies are up to. NASA's Psyche, NASA DART mission, and how they play into like larger UN initiatives about planetary defense. I think that I will also mention something you can look up called the Artemis Accords. Artemis Accords were developed by NASA and the State Department. They are bilaterally negotiated with, I think it's about 7 or 8, I think it's now 10 other space agencies, and they set the rules, kind of a addendum, kind of an addition to the normative framework for space activities, although they're not binding law, but they certainly add on to what is in the Outer Space Treaty, and they're specific to the moon. And NASA's Artemis mission is to return to the moon with people, with the phrases, the first woman and next man to the moon. Initially, I believe they said 2024. It'll be a few years after that. But they want to go there to stay, to create economic activity, to create infrastructure, to do long-term presence, long-term science. And to do that, they're going to do it with other space agencies around the world. And to have those rules and understandings of what they're going to do on the moon, and to implement some of the obligations in the Outer Space Treaty, they've developed these Artemis Accords. And the Artemis Accords are, like I said, non-binding, but they are the new normative framework for what we would like to do on the moon. So we're setting the new rules for what we would like to do on celestial bodies. The growth of space law is, I would say, moribund from maybe you could say the 80s to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, but we realize now that we do need new rules and better rules and clearer rules and more comprehensive rules for many of the things that we want to do in space, whether it is mining asteroids, using space mineral resources on the moon, or say space traffic management and space debris, or redirecting asteroids, or getting into the security issue, other troubling issues that need addressing. And that's why I mentioned before that UK proposal on working in the UN framework to have a serious discussion on what's possible for new norms for space activities. With that, I think I've probably said quite a bit in a broad-ranging fashion. So I would thank you for your attention, and I'll give the floor back to Alex, and if we want to open it up for questions and discussions.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. So I want to pick up on the question from Harini. We also have some folks joining from Hawaii, aloha. And so therefore we must talk about Oumuamua, also the Hawaiian word for scout, which was this interstellar object that came through our neighborhood in 2017, 2018. So this object displayed non-gravitational acceleration, meaning there was no sort of explanation for how this thing was moving at 200,000 miles an hour through our neighborhood, because all the asteroids are typically traveling, 40, 50,000 miles an hour. And the other such fascinating recent development is it's only since 1995 that we're able to detect, using telescopes and others, planets around stars. So here we have this visitor that's unexplained, we have this new ability to see planets. And in fact, now the estimate, Chris and I were talking about this, is somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 billion planets in our galaxy, potentially. So that's the current estimate. So if you want to just comment about what it means, to have cooperation in space, given that they're out there and we just maybe haven't met our extraterrestrial neighbors yet.
I mean, the first thing I'd mention is that when one astronomer, when observatory, I guess it was in Hawaii, saw this object, Oumuamua, moving across the night sky in the background, immediately international cooperation went into play. Immediately that observatory contacted other observatories all over the world in different jurisdictions, different countries, different nationalities, to say, we're seeing something very interesting and unique. Can you devote some camera time, some lens time to it? Look in this area of the sky, confirm what we're seeing, see if you can look at it, get a better image of it, or get more data of it. So, space exploration, especially ground-based space exploration through observatories, is deeply international in nature and collaborative and peaceful and cooperative, and there's huge synergies, perfectly illustrated by Oumuamua and tracking Oumuamua. When I read that entire book by Avi Loeb, Extraterrestrial, about the qualities and elements of Oumuamua, and all these things, that it was more reflective than we've ever seen anything. It was traveling at a speed that was noticeably shocking and noticeable. It seemed to be rotating. It seemed to be either elongated or a pancake. It seemed to not have gases flowing off of it, even though it accelerated and changed direction. Its trajectory around the sun did not go as it should have gone, according to traditional celestial mechanics and astrodynamics of how an object at that speed, affected by a celestial body of that size and that mass, should have curved. But the thing is once we only had a few days to observe it, and it is likely we will never be able to launch a spacecraft and catch up and get more data about Oumuamua. So the only thing that we could do is hopefully learn more about the data that we have about it. And by that, I mean either have a deeper and richer understanding of the data that we have based on that one interstellar object, or if we see other objects, now that we have the capabilities online, we've only been looking for these things for a short period of time. If we see other objects that look similar to Oumuamua, and we go, oh, well, what we thought was absolutely unique is maybe not that unique. If we see 5 or 10 more of them in the next 20 or 30 years, and we see them with enough time, maybe to go and rendezvous with them, or we see them coming and going with enough time to really image them, we may learn more about these other new next objects that would characterize and explain Oumuamua better. Although Avi Loeb points out in that book, not long after Oumuamua, we saw another interstellar object, Borisov, that had looked nothing like it. It just looked like an asteroid. Whereas the image of Oumuamua looked like nothing we had ever seen. And so the posit, Avi Loeb's posit, is that if it looks like nothing we've ever seen, and you don't have understandings and rules of nature that explain its creation, it is logically wrong to say it must have been created naturally by natural processes. And therefore, you can't leave out, it is logically wrong to leave out the possibility that it was artificially created. That's his only argument. He's not saying he definitely knows for certain. He's saying it's wrong to say it wasn't.
Thank you, Chris. So we have 2 questions from good friends, Joe Baxter and Eva Martyr, related. How does private enterprise connect with the UN, RE space adventure? Have there been limits imposed on private enterprise? And then the Eva's version of the question, which gives a nice counter angle, which is, what is your opinion on the privatization of space travel, like SpaceX?
This is great, and I hope people watch the SpaceX successful and then not successful landing of Starship, the Star SN10 yesterday. It landed, came down, looked safe, and then it exploded. First, international law perspective, please read Article 6, just Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty. We have private enterprise in the world, but the outer space domain is unique in how space activities are governed. By that, I mean any activities that happen in outer space, whether governmental, NASA rockets, Department of Defense rockets, or private activities, commercial activities, whether either of those two, a government is internationally responsible for those activities, no matter private or commercial, or private, commercial, or governmental. A state is internationally responsible, meaning answerable for those activities to other governments. So if a private entity in state A causes damage in space or on the Earth to another state or another state's actors or private entities or citizens in state B, state A will not go and sue the private entity. State A will present a claim, or state B will present a claim to state A, saying our citizens, our territory was affected by one of your national activities. How you deal with that on the national level, whether you seek reimbursement or you indemnify them, or how are you prohibit them from ever going to space again, that's up to you. Here's our damages. You know, this rocket body came back to the ground and polluted, or you hit our spacecraft in space. We're not going to deal with the private actor, with SpaceX or whoever it was. We're dealing on a state-to-state level. This is unique in international law, where no test really is required in space activities. In other activities, there is a test. Are those citizens the responsibility of the state? In Article 6, it says there's no test. If they're private, if they're national activities, the state's responsible. This was a compromise, in fact, between the US delegation and the Soviet delegation. The Soviets didn't want any private activities in space. They didn't want any commercial companies in space. And the Americans, Goldberg, and the US delegation said, well, how about if we permit them, but no matter what, we'll be responsible for them. The compromise worked, and therefore private activities in space are permitted. Now, you know, when we talk about, although their states are directly responsible for those private activities, and Article 6 imposes an obligation on states. If you permit private activities to go in space, you are positively required to authorize and continually supervise those activities to ensure that those private activities are in continuing compliance with international law, with the Outer Space Treaty and any other norms of international law. So what private actors do in space, governments are really on the hook for and have to actually really look at and look into and supervise. So who does that in the US? It's the FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, the Department of Commerce, Office of Space Commercialization, the FCC, which grants licenses. And if you have a camera looking back at the Earth, you have to get permission to do so from the from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So, you know, I'm fine with private actors doing things in space, but no one is fine with them violating international law.
Bob Sims' question, can you comment more about the concept of space being used by a single state for offensive or defensive endeavors? Specifically, how can the UN keep us safe from ideas like Space Force?
So the Outer Space Treaty, it was seen at the time as a disarmament or a non-armament treaty in line with previous treaties and subsequent treaties. It's really coming from the Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1961 or 63, preventing the testing of nuclear weapons in the upper atmosphere, on the high seas, or in outer space. Well, Then the Outer Space Treaty is negotiated, and of course followed by the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. The disarmament provisions of the Outer Space Treaty is Article 4. Says that outer space shall be used for peaceful purposes, but peaceful does not mean non-military. And so militaries are allowed to do things in space, and they do things in space. And not everything the military does is unlawful. They do treaty verification. They are allowed to look at their own territories. They're allowed to look at other territories. They're allowed to protect their own assets in space. They're allowed to use space assets for lawful operations on the ground. One of the largest actors in outer space is the US military in terms of space capabilities. So a space force, a division of the Army which has space competency, is permissible under international law. The US, the Russians, the Chinese have space divisions, Space Force divisions. There are limits on what can be placed in space. Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty prohibits the placement of nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction into space, or their placement, or their stationing in space, or their stationing on any celestial body. So space is non-weaponized of WMDs, but conventional weapons are therefore permitted in space. Additionally, so you can go and read Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty. What I think is of growing importance, and I have the moon as my background, is the second paragraph of Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, which says that the moon shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes, and that the stationing, maneuvers, installations, and fortifications of militaries on the moon is expressly prohibited. So the moon has even greater protections from the military. It is even, there are greater prohibitions placed on military activities on the moon. Besides that, I'm not one who thinks that conflict in space is inevitable, but there are certainly strategic rationales for militaries conducting space activities, and we will just have to see whether those militaries and the nations in charge of those militaries understand that space is a shared domain, that if you create a cloud of debris, that debris is long-lived as it orbits the Earth. It can expand in altitude, going higher and lower. It is persistent over months and years, and that conflict in space can affect not just you and your adversary, but it can affect all other users of the space domain.
Okay, Chris, here's a question from Harini. Could you please discuss satellite maneuvering and the legal challenges it may pose?
This is difficult. I mean, you can kind of think of a scenario where if I'm traveling at orbital velocity, a satellite A is traveling at an orbital velocity, and it doesn't have maneuverable capabilities, and satellite B is similarly situated, and they are on a path which predicts that there will be a conjunction event, that they will collide, or there's this high probability that they will collide. Who's at fault? The fault rules in international space law as to who has the last option to, who has the last possibility of maneuvering out of the way. And if you don't maneuver out of the way, are you at fault? And if you make it impossible for you to move out of the way because you don't have any propulsion or station keeping or maneuverable capabilities, were you inherently negligent in placing your satellite in, launching your satellite in such a fashion? There's issues of what the rules should be governing circumstances like that. There's also technological challenges in our awareness of the space domain, of where satellites are at any given point in time. You can, I would say, just Google, I'll type it in there. You can Google an excellent website that shows you, the nature of the space domain, ROB. Just go to, type those to Moriba Jah and astrograph. He's a astrodynamicist, and his website at UT Austin it takes data from all the ground-based sensor systems, Americans, Russians, further commercial SSA providers, puts them all into like kind of a three-dimensional graph, an overlay of the Earth. You could add the layer of space debris on there, add that as an option or a layer. You can, and then run it forward in time. You'll see how complex some of these, how some of these systems work. And once you start to do that, you see how absolutely challenging some of these things are.
Thank you. So we have 2 questions here. What is a good book to read on space travel exploration for beginners? And then Eva is asking, do you want to go to space?
Let's follow that. The book for beginners. What do you want to learn about? Like space law, history of space travel. What type of book? Is it in there?
Yeah, space travel exploration. So the future of man's adventure off of Earth.
A good, I would say like a beginner book. I am reading this one, The Value of the Moon. Hold on, it's not showing up. The Value of the Moon. Oh, Jesus, yeah. I'll have to turn off my. And then, if you want to, let me think here. If you want to learn about like history of space travel, it's The Heavens and the Earth, Myers McDougall. It is This New Ocean by, I think his last name is Burroughs. Yeah, I'll follow up with Alex to write in some recommendations, along with like, if you want to learn about history of space, this is the one. Like prospects of the moon, this is the one. Prospects of space exploration in general, this is the one. A lot of the books, I would say, many people's lives have been changed by books written by Robert Zubrin, namely The Case for Mars, The Case for Space, The Exploration of Space by Zubrin, as a way of like, these are possible futures. A novel that people read are the Mars, the Red Mars and Green Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson, talking about how slowly over the course of centuries it may be possible to terraform Mars and make it a livable environment through processes that are possible, like the introduction of mold and spores, then grasses, to change the geoengineer the atmosphere of Mars. Yeah, many people say the Green Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson is an excellent one.
Thank you. Eva's full of questions. I think she's going to be taking this to her science teacher tomorrow with these new insights. Guidelines, laws unique to those followed by Perseverance? Are there examples?
I think that, so Perseverance is the new rover that was sent, that's the size of an SUV, that landed on Mars not long ago, a couple of weeks ago. What we have to do for, if you want to do science on Mars, and you want to look for what astrobiologists call second genesis, meaning either the presence of existing life or evidence of past life, even if it's a single cell or multicellular level, tiny organisms and viruses, tiny things to look for. If you are going to go to Mars and look in the briny areas or the salty areas or the areas with water, to look for, life, second genesis, you don't want to find life that you go, oh, that's life from Earth that we accidentally brought there. So anything that we send to a celestial body, whether it's going to look for life or not, we have to cook it at extremely high temperatures to kill off any Earth life. Because to just, for basic, scientific hygiene principles, if you are going to look to a place where life may thrive, you don't want to infect it or inoculate it with life that, you brought. So the bad news is that, from a astrobiological perspective, 12 human beings have already been to the moon, and each of those astronauts carried a lot of Earth-based life, and they left stuff there, including like things that they didn't need, used materials, used gloves and artifacts, but also human waste that they left on the moon, only in those few Apollo landing sites. Much of the moon, and the moon is a large place, we did not pollute with Earth life, but Mars is larger and certainly more attractive for looking for astrobiology, looking for present life or past life, because it is salty, because it's briny, because it is has water reserves, has energy dynamics on it. The same is true for Europa or Titan. These are places where water is prevalent, and energy is prevalent, and water, not just H2O, but like liquid water is in place. And so we have to do what is called planetary protection. Mentioned before, planetary defense. That's protecting the Earth from asteroids. Planetary protection is protecting celestial bodies from life from Earth, and bat contamination, protecting the planet Earth from any life form that we may bring back from space. And it's difficult to do. It's difficult to really cook these instruments to kill off any life. And because we have, I think it's even on the ISS, the International Space Station, things have been returned to Earth that should not have had life on them, meaning like this was outside in the vacuum of space, and we found microbiological spores on it and stuff like that. I think also going back to even Apollo, they brought a camera back from the moon that they had left there on a previous mission, and there was then they thought they had cleaned it, and they found that there was life on it, that there was like little microbes and spores on it. So planetary protection is a difficult task. It's expensive, but for the purposes of astrobiology, it's necessary.
Alrighty. Well, this has been great, Chris. Your contribution to our knowledge, raising the knowledge level of United Nations advocates, I think has been absolutely a resounding success. Lots of thank yous coming through Q&A and chat. And so I'm going to, again, thank you very much for this investment of time. I'm going to switch over now just to say goodbye with a little couple of links to our organization. And Chris, I can't wait for the next time that we get to
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, so here's a screenshot. Feel free to take a screenshot of this if you like. Our website, our email address, how to join, how to subscribe to get 3 to 4 emails from us every month about our programs and events. Today's webinar will be on our YouTube channel. Just search for UNASWCT. We are unique, and you'll go straight to our channel. Thank you very much for attending. I'm Alex Anvari. Good night. See you next time.